We are professionals.
That makes fun of us. And on that note, welcome to an episode of 22 at the Libs. This is the podcast from healthcare providers, EMS providers, to anybody and everybody in between. And like I've said before, whether you work in EMS, whether you work in the hospital setting, whether you are the custodian, we appreciate them exponentially. Or you are the random bystander who just happened to stumble upon this setup. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Today, I have with me Josh. I'm not going to say his last name. He asked me not to. It's like this whole, like, he wants to stay anonymous kind of thing. I don't know. Just kidding. So, Josh has a vast experience in EMS. He's been in EMS around 5 years, and it's very versatile. It's not just like some of the people I've had on, just working as a paramedic or just working in one specific area. It's extensive. I'm going to have him kind of talk about it a little bit, but he is a medical instructor for TACMed, and we're going to kind of bring that up. He is what would you say, or like the image of pneumatic clinician, or like what would you like to be introduced as?
Yeah, I just nomadic condition is it's really started as my personal IG account. And I just kind of morphed from there as I started pushing out more and more content for like I guess lay people like medical education, and then like within the EMS circles as well. So really it's just like that's just my IG handle. It's not really anything. I mean, it's not like a company or anything, It's just like a nickname. Can we call it a nickname? But it's not. Don't call me that.
So part of the nomadic clinicians also experience. No, I'm just kidding. He's obviously, like I said, he's worked as a paramedic, as an FTO. We'll dive into that. He's not worked. Sorry, editing people. He served in the Air Force, worked in areas of law enforcement and security, and also for the agency I work at, he was a CCT medic during the times of the COVID. And I do want to dive into that. So a couple of little things, nothing too crazy. But Josh, if you want to introduce yourself, tell the people who you are, what you stand for. The floor is yours, my guy.
Great. First, thanks for having me on here. This is actually like a really cool, huge honor. But yeah, so my name is Josh. I am a paramedic. Like you said, I've been doing it for about 5 years. I have an Instagram that is Nomadic Clinician, where I put out a bunch of medical content and get into arguments with people in the comments half the time. But we try to keep it like very wholesome and civil over there. For the most part, yeah, I started out in private EMS, working primarily 911 with transfers, moved on to critical care. At the height of my burnout, which is the normal, like around the 3-year mark or so. Doesn't take very long, but I made transition into doing travel contracts. So I was able to hop around for a couple different places, a couple different states, and fill roles in both like the 911 side and then like some safety, industrial medicine. I had a short stint offshore. I found out it wasn't for me. Um, Offshore referring to like the oil and gas for anybody that's not like super familiar with the Gulf Coast industries. But yeah, now I still work PRN for a 911 service. We are municipal for the most part, third service, and also hospital based. And then I teach for a company called Orion Training Group, and we teach TACMed type courses, and then like general medical preparedness type courses. And I think we'll dive into that some at some point.
So kind of a big reason I wanted Josh on is I feel like a big part of getting the most of your experience in EMS is not just going through the schooling, knowing your protocols, your pathophysiology of what medications do, the A&P of the body, but it's also the aspect of like teaching and instructing, and not just, how do I put this? Not just a matter of like sharing the information you know, but also being able to instill that information into current providers, future providers, aspects of what's next to come in the future generations of EMS, which sounds really prestige and pretentious, but I mean, it's realistic. So, Josh, if you want to tell me about your experience as an FTO, why you became an FTO, your favorite moments, what it entails for you. Go ahead, my guy.
Yeah, that's a huge subject and kind of what you were getting into there. I think teaching for anybody that wants to grow as a provider in general, or regardless of your field, like being able to teach your craft is something that that's how we display mastery, and that's how we know that we've gotten to that point. Is it goes back to the whole like watch one, do one, teach one concept, where that's how I know we have an understanding level. So if I can show you something and you can teach that back to me, I know you got it. I know it's clicked. For me, moving on to FTO, that was it was an area that I knew I already liked when I was in the Air Force. As an NCO, I got to spend a lot of time like teaching troops and like going over different stuff and kind of like molding and guiding these like young airmen. And as a paramedic, I and I think just in life in general, I'm normally looking for that next step, right? So like I finished paramedic school, I did that for a while. I kind of hit a bunch of like calls on my checklist that I wanted to do. Like I've done these things, and it's like, what's next? And they had FTO openings. I did that, and it was actually like a really, really like good experience for me as a provider and as an educator, just because like you have to learn how to educate different people. Obviously, you can't teach everybody the same way. That was a big thing that we learned in leadership school and stuff like that. But along with that, it makes me stay on top of my game, right? Because like that's the worst thing in general is like somebody asks you a question, you're like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to it. Like, so you've got to admit it. You've got to be able to say, like, I don't know, and I'll find out the answer for you. But at the same time, like, I don't want to be that guy. So, like, becoming an FTO was very, very fulfilling in that. For one, I'm getting to interact with students. I get to actually like teach, and also like it keeps me just on top of my craft, which is like a young medic. And but I would still consider myself like a pretty like inexperienced medic as far as like time wise goes. It's just so helpful, so helpful. I can't think of any like big moments. I know you asked about it offhand. There's just so many of them that like you see it click. When I did work for the private EMS company, we had naval special warfare students that would come work in our area right on trots. And I remember those guys, they're just hammered going through paramedic school with information. And basically they go from like zero to paramedic in about an 8 month time frame, because they go to school every day, and the instructors are able to just feed them information. So they get on the trots, and they're really still mastering like their EMT skills along with their paramedic skills. And I had a patient that was kind of out of it. I was actually on a transfer, and the patient was laid back and snoring. And I remember the student asking about it, and I was like, yeah, this is a really good example. Like, let's just reposition this guy's head so everything's in line. And like the snoring stopped, and you could see it click, right? You could see like, oh, like that's opening an airway or whatnot. And it's all those little moments. There's nothing like huge with it. It's just those little moments of like seeing the light come on that really sells being an FTO.
One thing I think is super commendable about being a teacher in general, as a former English teacher in a high school, um, it takes a lot of patience, and not everybody is made to be an FTO, because it's hard whenever you know the information, and sometimes it's like those little things. And like, I've caught myself whenever I was teaching, and sometimes like on the truck with former partners and stuff, just kind of having that moment of like, you should know this. Like, it's not that hard. And so being able to take that information and take your experience as your own provider, and I don't want to say dumb it down, but like you said, kind of mold it into that individual's learning style. It takes a lot of effort.
It does. It does. And I think so. I think we've all had those moments. And I think that's a challenge when it comes to like teaching as a FTO or field training officer, versus like teaching in a classroom as well, right? Because we know the types of days we have, we know the schedules we work, and like when I'm doing this full time, and like especially like when I was newer, like there were times when I had like a very short temper, especially when it comes to stuff like that. Like would like why can't you put the sheet on the cot the right way, right? Like why why did we not like restock this things? Like it's little stuff, but like um and more so with like partners and students, because you have your FTO face as well, right? You know you have a student, you want this whole thing to go well for them, so you kind of put on that face. But like with partners, there were times when like I know I absolutely like blew up and like lost it over things that I had no reason to lose it over most of the time. They're if there's partners listening to this, you know, um, I've apologized already, and I'm still very sorry. But it's good because it also teaches you like with experience, like you learn to manage that more. And it's important to remember, especially with students, that like they're new, they don't know, that's why they're there, right? Even with paramedic students, like paramedic students are the worst, but at the end, if when they're at the end of their school journey and they're doing team leads or whatever else, like they don't know, like they've been told but they don't. um and most of the time with paramedic students, they don't know what they don't know, because we all come out of school thinking that like we've got it all figured out and we know everything. But yeah, it's definitely difficult in EMS because like you're dealing with the calls, you're dealing with everything on top of like wanting to teach and be a good instructor at the same time. So it definitely takes the right person. I've as I'm sure you had, I've worked under people who were fantastic at it. And I'm grateful for that. And I've seen some examples of people who like weren't so great at it sometimes as well.
It's something that when I was a paramedic student,
Mhm.
which sometimes was rough, I'll be honest. Woo, looking back at some of the calls that I would team lead, or sometimes I just existed on, just being quite frank.
Mhm.
Oh, anyways, so something that one provider told me was, and I was kind of near the end ish of the whole stint of like capstone and team leads and whatnot. He told me, he was like, look, you have a way of presenting information that people can understand, whether that's from your teaching experience or some kind of characteristic you have, whatever it is. He was like, if you move on and you become an FTO, he said, don't ever forget that at one point you were in their shoes. You were the one who didn't know. This is embarrassing. You didn't know the milligram to milliliter dose of Narcan.
Right.
So I'm like, You're right, I don't. I'm kind of dumb. So-
And that, I mean, it can be. I mean, a lot of times when that kind of stuff happens, you have to double check with people too, and just be like, hey, did you like, all right, like, do you know when you said the wrong thing, or do you not know? Because like, if we're at this point and we don't know exactly, like, at least something like a med dose, there may be more work to do at that point. But so most of the time, students are just so nervous that like they make dumb mistakes, right? And that's just part of being an FTO. Like you need to be able to like identify those and realize that they're nervous and like be able to coach in like a way that actually works for the student, right? Versus get it right. Like,
Berating.
yeah, yeah, I mean, I learned a lot in the military. One thing in the military, there's a certain style of training that is taught and done in the military a lot of times that it's not effective. It's not it works in the setting sort of, but as far as like talking to everyday people, it's not the way. Like you don't yell, you don't like berate. It doesn't work, right? It doesn't. People shut down. um and that just comes back to like adult learning models and learning how to teach people.
So on the note of instruction,
Uh-huh.
um, tell me about like what you teach at Orion and like your tag med course and your role in it, what it is, what we can gain from it.
Sure. So as far as like we'll do like 30,000 foot view and then down. So at Orion Training Group, we teach open enrollment courses for American citizens. And what that means for us is that like as long as you are an American and you don't have like crazy felonies or anything like that, then you're welcome to come to our classes. So we teach well, and I say that because we do teach a lot of things that involve firearms. We teach close quarters battle or CQB, which is more of like your building clearing, SWAT tactics. We'll teach long range shooting. We teach how to use night vision, using night vision for doing activities, and then we've brought TACMED into that as well. It was actually one of the first courses that we offered, and so what it started out as is, and what I still teach is I teach TECLEO or TECC LEO, which is Tactical Emergency Casualty Care for law enforcement officers, and then TECC, which is so it's a 1 day for TECLEO, it's a 2 day for TECC. We started developing courses to get away from those. For the most part, that NAEMT designs those courses to be taught to law enforcement officers and EMRs for the 1 day, and then the 2 day. Um, I think EMTs, at least EMT basics, can understand everything that's involved in those courses. They're really designed for paramedics, so I don't limit who can come to my course, and an AEMT would like prefer that you did. So it's like I do open enrollment. You don't have to have a medical like license or certification to come to class, and it's kind of how we started getting into the homebrew thing. So they're really like based around the same area. When I talk about the homebrew classes, it's you know really we've taken like the stop to bleed type content and brought in a little bit of your like wilderness first responder type stuff, and then mix that with the tactics as well. So we offer a couple of different types of classes in that. Our TAC Med is pretty much stop to bleed with some extra steps. I mean, it teaches your basic March algorithm, yeah, which is my preferred like assessment algorithm for trauma. It teaches your basic like how to deal with life threats at the point of injury, and then really how to get people out of the situation. Moving from there, I teach a care under fire course, which is It's a force on force class, meaning it's going to use we're going to use simunitions and or airsoft guns. So people are shooting at you. You have the opportunity to shoot back. That's actually, we have our common friend Cecil or whatnot. And that's how I met him. He came out to take the care under fire class. So what it is, we do a day of introduction to CQB, to get people used to like walking into rooms in like a thoughtful manner. And then the next day we add in like how to treat injuries and how to extract people. And the end of that day is just culmination exercises of them doing both. Those are the things. And then my newer course is based around more of the like remote and wildland stuff, just because I think a lot of our fan base deals with a lot of time in the backcountry, whether it's hiking or camping or overlanding or whatever. And so I wanted to start giving people some education on what to do when like somebody's not going to be at their side in 15 to 20 minutes, so it's a lot more mindset and logistic oriented as far as like how to prepare for an expedition, how to make long and short-term care plans, and then like considerations for evacuation, whether we have to like carry somebody out because we just hiked 7 miles a day prior, or if we need to be able to set up a LZ, how we're going to get in touch with people when there's not cell phone service. Just, it kind of covers the wide range of stuff in that like kind of survival and preparedness realm, but mostly with a medical focus from my point.
And I think it's super cool because even though like we're called first responders, 9 times out of 10, like in that wilderness setting or like y'all's combat fire and stuff like that, there's already somebody there. And then it's hard whenever like in the EMS setting or the 911 setting, whatever you want to call it, whether you're fire EMS, like you get there, but people are already there. And so that ability to provide, I wouldn't say just basic education, but like awareness and the what to do when aspect could literally be life-saving, rather than like we get there, we have to do the whole assessment, we have to do the whole scene safety, we have to do like if things are already put in place, it makes our job easier, but it's also way beneficial for the patient.
Absolutely. I think one of the coolest parts about it, teaching outside of EMS, for me, like, so I enjoy teaching like lay people, everyday people, probably more than I enjoy teaching EMS, just because they get it, they get the meaning behind it. My favorite so far has been law enforcement. I was able to work with a local police department for a while, making sure everybody got the TECC course. So we went over everything that would be carried in like a typical IFAC, like the individual first aid kit, which for anybody else's like situational awareness, it would just be typically it's a tourniquet of some kind, wound packing gauze, chest seals, nasopharyngeal airways, and gloves, basic stuff at that point. So we go over how to use all of these things, and I every class I taught at this police department, like within a couple of weeks of teaching it, somebody was able to use those adjuncts, right? Like so, we had shootings where people applied chest seals before EMS showed up. We had wrecks and accidents where people were able to apply tourniquets, and like literally like 5 or 6 different officers have been able to like save somebody's life because of these courses. And that's huge, especially from an EMS standpoint. Like if it's a violent event or something, like we know law enforcement's going to beat us there. Like they're going to be there in time, and we know like if somebody's hitting a major artery, like how long it's going to be before they are like not recoverable. So it's absolutely huge, and it's been so rewarding. Especially plus during the classes, I get to make jokes about them giving way too much Narcan all the time, and talk about how to like identify the difference between an overdose and a diabetic patient. So like super fun times all the way around, honestly.
I'm glad you said that because I was absolutely going to bring it up.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. We still, it's joke, but it's not. Yep.
I love getting on the scene of an overdose, quote unquote, sometimes. And they come out with like the little nasal sprays. One time it was 3 of them. And they're like,
Everybody's
the
got it.
patient's still not waking up. And I'm like, yeah, they're kind of having a stroke. No wonder they're not waking up. Woo. Appreciate our officers out there, but and sometimes they just don't know better. Can't get mad at them every time.
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty much like everything about the courses that like Orion teaches though for us anyway. I'm actually like trending away from all of the stop the bleed, like point of injury stuff. It's absolutely like vital information for somebody that doesn't know it, and is like literally life saving. But I really wanted to get into like as I progress as an instructor and a medic myself, like I really want to teach more like for long field care and like extended time with the patient type stuff because I find it really, really interesting. And I think it's very likely for like people who spend a lot of time outdoors or anywhere else.
So speaking of versatile settings, tell me about your time as a contract medic. For the people who don't know, like what is that? What are the pros and cons of that versus in my case at least, signing up for an agency where you have a sign-on bonus and you sell
Right,
your soul for a couple of years. Not that I mind it.
right,
I love the
right.
agency I work at, but traveling would be cool.
So talking about pros of travel contract work, this signing bonuses are normally like your monthly salary. It's crazy lucrative as far as like that side of it goes. Not probably not my biggest takeaway from it, but it's definitely like one of the pros is that like it is you are paid very, very well for what you do. And with that, you're expected to perform at a certain level and for a certain amount of time for it. I would say like travel contracting saved my career, right? I like doing 911 full time to the point where like working in a busy area, uh, it it just wore on me to the point where like I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy going to work. I didn't enjoy, like I could feel myself like losing that empathy and everything else for people because I was like literally like the same thing that I'm sure lots of people do, but like I could name half my patients before I got to the scene. And like pretty much like hopping out of the truck being like, hey, so and so, like, what do you want today? Get in the truck, let's go to the hospital. Like, and it's not the place you want to be as a provider, right? Like we talk about empathy and everything, but like when you lose that empathy and like it when you're at that level of burnout, you're not doing thorough assessments, you're missing things. It's not where you want to be at all. And I was there, I knew it. I was looking for an out anyway. And this is I don't know, 21-ish. So like towards like the end of like the busiest parts of COVID. But yeah, got an initial. I just started like throwing out resumes to all of these like companies. I think I'm still rostered with like 30 companies total or something like that to get phone calls, and like it's how I was able to do it consistently for such a long time. But yeah, my first one, obviously I still won't name like the agency or anything, but like it wouldn't be hard to figure out, I'm sure. So my first contract was in the Virgin Islands, which was pretty fortunate because I was planning on taking a contract in Iraq at the time and going overseas, and I got this offer in the Virgin Islands that was paying pretty much the same thing as I was going to make in Iraq as a like security professional slash paramedic. So I decided that the Caribbean sounded way better than the Middle East at the time, and went there. Ended up being just the best thing as far as working in a system where there's like two trucks total. Like we ended up starting the third truck during the course of this whole thing. Um, this community has like zero idea of what 911 abuse or anything is. They don't use healthcare. So like when they're calling 911, like something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. And it gave you just a sense of doing it. And also it got me out of my area. It's just something I was talking to somebody about recently. It was I was even with my burnout and everything else, I was decently high performer and in my area. When I hit through on this contract, I was one of the youngest and like least experienced medics there. So everybody else is pushing like 15, 20 years. Like as a medic, they've worked in the contract world for a long time. This is like very early in the travel phase, like really got started. So everybody there was just such a giant breadth of experience in all these other areas, and it was very humbling to be like, oh, I'm like in a much larger pond now. So like I am a small fish once again. Um, and from there it just kind of kept rolling. Like that was probably one of my primary contracts was in the islands going back and forth, just because of how much I enjoyed the community. I got a chance to work out in Oregon for a bit, which is a very cool system, working on a reservation in that area. Another community that was just very, very in need, and like you actually feel like you're making a difference at that point. Um, Outside of that, a lot of the other stuff was just filling in for like staffing crises and whatnot. So like time in California. I'm sorry for anybody that's listening from California. Y'all's protocols are extremely limiting. Um, like to the point where like they were time like if you had an identified anaphylaxis patient, like you could give them Benadryl, but you had to call before you would give IM epi. Like you had to have orders to be able to give epi. Um, yeah, my med bots consisted of almost nothing. I think I had Zofran, Narcan, and Benadryl, and like my ACLS drugs, and that was about it. All right. California's rough, but it was still fun to work. But yeah, jumped around. Like I said, I did some time offshore, and that was mostly with like COVID testing and stuff like that. After about a month, I realized that like living on an oil rig or like drill ship wasn't really for me. I was getting very, very stir crazy by the end of the month. Um, but yeah, the whole experience, man, just like you learn so much because like working 911 these different areas, you learn that there's cultural differences and stuff like that. There's protocol differences, which is always fun as well because you'll be introduced to new drugs that like you may have not seen before, and then you're like on your first night on the truck because you just landed 8 hours prior and they needed somebody to work, but you're like furiously doodling what these drugs are, because like you never carried whatever. I can't think of a good example. Like I always had Solumedrol. We never learned about debts or anything like that growing through paramedic school. And I remember we had the first contract I got to, we had debts instead of Solumedrol. I had to look up everything. Um, and also as like a newer medic, I never carried morphine. So like I knew the dosages, but I never really used it. So I had to look that up. But then with that, you also learn that like sick people are sick people no matter where you go, right? So like no matter where I've worked, the calls have always been the same. I know you've worked in a couple other areas as well throughout your career, and that was like my biggest takeaway of going different places was that like the calls are all the same. Most of the time, the local employees are all griping about the same things no matter where you go. It doesn't really change. Most systems are dealing with the same problems, and I don't know. It was just eye opening to get out of my area and kind of start seeing EMS as like a just from a wider lens versus what was happening like right near my home. Um, Definitely cool experience. I would recommend anybody doing it once they had a little bit of experience under their belts.
I'm glad you said the thing about every agency has like its good and bad.
Mhm.
And no matter where you're at geographically, like you said, sick people are still sick people. Something my first partner in EMS told me, because we worked at that agency together, obviously, but I
Yes.
always talked about a municipal agency um, in the state of Louisiana that like I drooled over. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Whatever.
Mhm.
Um, he told me, he's like, bro, no matter where you work, it's all McDonald's. It is all the same thing.
So
And I can't get past that.
that's a yeah, yeah, no, that's a really good way to put it, actually. I didn't think about that, but yeah, yeah, it is. And honestly, having worked both now, I've worked obviously like for a private service in Louisiana, but I work at a municipal service, and I work hand in hand with people like from other adjacent municipal services, and like the grass isn't always greener, right? Like there are some municipal services, especially like where we live, that are, they're progressive and aggressive as well with some things, which like seems really cool. Um, but it's the same thing. Like you're getting the same calls, you deal with the same stuff. I think it's really, and that's something to talk about as well. I guess it's just that like if we look at like longevity in EMS, and if you want to stay in this career field, right, and keep doing it, that's one of my other takeaways from travel is that like the same thing. The grass isn't always greener. Now it definitely gives you other opportunities. It widens your experience. But if you can be happy where you're at, right? If you can truly be happy in your spot, and there's something to say about like staying somewhere and like helping that system grow versus like jumping to try to find something else. I don't know if it's my ADHD or whatnot, but I've only got a certain amount of bandwidth for like an agency or whatnot, and then I'll kick rocks, which is something I've tried to do less of in EMS versus like previous careers. So yeah, I mean, those there are definitely some agencies that are worth drooling over out there. There are some places that like I would love to work in, positions that I would love to do. Uh, there's just other aspects of that too. Like, are you willing to relocate? Like, we didn't really talk about all the cons of travel. Um, but one of the aspects of that is that you are traveling, right? You are away from home. You're away from like your space. And sometimes that may mean like sharing a hotel room with like somebody that you just met getting off the plane, because like you and your partner are running 24/7, and like your downtime is in your hotel room, right? Because you're there for a disaster. It may mean that like you have to fly somewhere and pick up a truck and drive that truck to a disaster area, and you're going to live out that truck for the extent of the time you're there. Like I know we have strike force and everything else, right? But like um, during Hurricane Ida, I lived in the parking lot of Shelby Hospital in Homa um, for 2.5 weeks. We had portable showers and stuff. We had all of the amenities were there for us, but still like you got to find somewhere to sleep and everything else. So there's definitely like some hard times to it as well. Um, there's pros and cons to everything. So if you can be happy where you're at, like there's nothing wrong with that either.
I've never done travel contract EMS style. Kind of like you brought up, I have worked in geographically different agencies.
Mhm.
Um, One thing that I used to like, I don't like anymore, are the deployments where you sign up for whatever, like natural disaster or things that are going on
Mhm.
I signed up for one where there was like our sister agency, whatever set was going on. Not going into details of where I used to work, but RIP. So
That's
we
not their initials.
literally what?
That's not their initials.
No, might as well be. So we we went to like we went to a different state, different city, and it was us and like two other crews, and we just helped out with their call volume because it was so extensive. But for these big deployments, I think it was Hurricane Laura or I don't remember, whichever one hit Lake Charles.
Mm.
It was my very first deployment, and I was very, very green. So I'm pumped. I'm like, yeah, we're gonna go do cool things. We're gonna rough it up. And they were warning us like, you're gonna be in an ambulance for 1 to maybe 3 weeks, and then you
Yeah,
might get positioned to somewhere else. And I went in with like that green mentality, super excited. After about day 3, I was done. I was so done. I just wanted to go home. I wanted an
right.
actual shower. I wanted an actual meal. I got tired of figuring out how to maneuver like from the passenger seat or the driver's seat of the ambulance, wearing a C collar or doing like head blocks taped to the headrest. I did another one and I'll never do another one. It
That's
was too much.
fantastic. Yeah, everybody wants to be a gangster. Uh, until it's time to do gangster stuff. And that's sleeping in the back of an ambulance doesn't really seem as gangster once you get into it. I I live for that. I there's something still in me that like if I get a call and they say like, hey, I need like, can you be like in this state within like 48 hours or something like that, and it's just like absolutely, like let me like just start throwing stuff in a bag, like send me a random plane ticket from somebody I don't know, and like I'm out. Like I'm gonna take like my personal stethoscope and like some clothes, and like I'm going. And there's just something exciting with it. Now it seems like the big trend is that there's not as many short-term contracts anymore. My preference is for like 1 to 2 months gone. Most things now are trending towards like 13 weeks to a year, and that's way long. That's a job. It's a job at that point. I don't want to be I don't want to be gone for that amount of time uh, any longer, especially as I get older. It's
It
fun.
just hits
I mean,
different when you can get off the shift and go home to your bed.
maybe so. Maybe it's like a mindset thing, because I know I'm gonna use some of the like most overused sayings like ever, but I don't have a better one for it at the moment. Um, from like the military's perspective, deployment wise, it was always like the embrace the suck, like this, like right, like this is terrible, but like we're it's terrible for everybody together, and that's what makes it like fun up until a point. I think like you said, I think after you've done it a few times or whatever, you're like, I'm not into this anymore. Um, I like the build up towards it. Um, the work part it's just work. Like we said, it's the same as anything else, you know. Sometimes you get to see like more interesting stuff during like hurricane responses and stuff. I saw a lot more like carbon monoxide poisoning was huge this last time. People had generators either way too close to their house or in their house or on the porch or whatever, and we were just getting call after call after call for carbon monoxide poisoning, um, which wasn't something I had seen a ton of in my career up until that point. So that was cool to actually be able to identify the presentation and stuff. Different experiences.
glad you brought that one up because during it was the Hurricane Laura deployment that we had. There was the day before, there was a call for there was a family of like 4 or 5, the mom, dad, all the kids had to be like, I think the dad drug out his entire family out of the house because everybody started getting real sleepy and they all had the carbon monoxide poisoning. And so that was the first time I'd ever seen it. And like I obviously like I learned about it in EMT school, but it felt like one of those foreign things that we'll never see of like organophosphate poisoning. Like
Right.
you may see it once. And so being able to like be there and see how the medics were working, understand why it's dangerous. And then my partner after explained like, it'll present as XYZ, even though, they have the 100% O2 sat, they're still doing trash.
Right.
So the next night we had this guy, he was there for like the demolition or reconstruction, whatever it was, sleeping in his giant, what's it called? One of those big, not tractor things, but like the things you see doing road work on the side of the road.
Okay.
Not a crane. I don't know what it is.
Fair enough.
I
But
just know it blocks traffic.
some kind of giant piece of equipment, right?
So like he would sleep in the cab, and he called because he was, I don't think he was tired. He just felt like he couldn't breathe. And so we get there and like everything was fine. Everything was completely fine. And he was like, yeah, I want to go to the hospital. I want to get checked out. And so we dropped him off. And I told my partner, like, was that the thing? Or it's really convenient that he just wanted to be off work for a day. Turns out his CO2 levels were trash. He started decompensating, I think like that night. So now every time we go to a call, I wish I was joking, like shortness of breath or altered mental status, there's that small part of me that's like, oh God, this is it again. I can't miss this.
The 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.